So welcome everyone to this BNID hosted career panel today on landing your dream job. We're going to be talking with hiring managers and recruiters in international development to get you guys all the best tips and advice on how to land your next job. This panel is part of the Boston Network for International Development, which we call BNID for short. This panel is organized by BNID in partnership with 4 universities, so Brandeis, Bridgewater State, MIT, and WPI. And the purpose of this, and we hold a bunch of events a year, is to really help you all, students, to be able to learn more about international development. What are careers like in international development? How do I get my foot in the door? As well as learning more about what is this thing called international development and how do I get involved? And how do I, learn more, think about jobs and all of that. So that's really what we're here for. And we will have another panel next month talking about forced migration and ethical responses to forced migration. We also have an in-person networking event coming up in April where you can have a chance to meet and talk with professionals based in the Boston area. So many exciting things coming up. I will share a link at the end of ways to keep in touch with BNID so you can make sure to get invitations to those upcoming events. But today we're here to talk about really getting jobs, resumes, interviews. How do you get that foot in the door? And how do you advance to your next job, whether it's a summer internship that you're looking for or a job after graduation? We are here to help you kind of figure out what comes next. So we've got 4 wonderful panelists joining us today. We have Jesse Bernstein, who is joining us from the U.S. Department of Justice. He's also had a long career at the State Department. We have Craig Zeileser, who joins us from PCDN, which is an amazing resource for finding jobs and just getting career advice. I'll let Craig say more about PCDN later. We have Anna Pentelik joining us from MIT D-Lab. Some of you might already know Anna, which is awesome. She's got so much just knowledge and experience, not only within the academia, but also within the UN. She used to work for UNICEF and other INGOs. And then we have Alizelu Ramasetti joining us from Oxfam. She's also one of our BNID board members, so we're so grateful for her for joining this session. And she's got a wealth of experience in international development, and we'll have a lot of great advice to share. But with that, I really want to let our panelists speak for themselves, kind of what work they do, a little bit more about kind of their backgrounds in international development. We'll go in that same order. Jesse, I'll pass it over to you.
I have to unmute myself. So great. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you this evening, and I'm really excited to be on this panel. And again, my name is Jesse Bernstein. I use he, his, and him pronouns. My focus in my career has been on human rights and democracy, specifically in the context of United States foreign policy. As Nanoko mentioned, I currently work at the Department of Justice, but I've held a range of positions at the Department of State, at the National Security Council in the White House, and prior to joining the US government, I worked for human rights organizations here in Washington, but also overseas, and humanitarian organizations such as the UN in Bosnia, and local human rights organizations in places like Uganda and Egypt. And I feel like I've had, a real privileged career, and I feel really lucky to have had the various positions and experiences I've had, and feel exceptionally grateful, and have also just been very focused on trying to reduce harms for people who haven't done anything but are stuck in harm's ways. And so I've done a lot of work on LGBT rights, on the Uyghurs and protecting Uyghurs who are experiencing trauma in China, as well as a range of other populations. So very excited to share some lessons, and excited to hear from all of you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jesse, and welcome. We'll go to Craig next.
Hi, everyone. Craig Zeileser, based in Medellin, Colombia. Wonderful to be here with such an exciting group, and to see Nanako. We met in person many years ago. So basically, I have 2 central questions that guided my career. The first was I took an undergraduate class taught by a career counselor. I did a radical hippie major at UMass. We spent a lot of time protesting. And the class was on social justice careers and basically how do you make a living and change the world or change the world while making a living. And then I've always been interested, actually three things, peace and also business. So basically one thing, I've had really good mentors throughout my life. And so one thing that I really encourage everyone to look at is fellowships as a form of getting professional experience. So I did junior abroad in Hungary right after the end of the Cold War, came back and the advisor's like, apply for Fulbright. And I said, Fulbright's only for important people. And she was very persistent. So I applied and was fortunate to get a Fulbright for 2 years to go back to Hungary and work with Roma and other groups. And I wound up setting up an NGO. Did a master's at Central European University, great place to look for graduate programs, lots of funding there. Helped set up, did a PhD where I didn't get any funding, but I got funding. It's a whole other story, but did the Boren Fellowship in Bosnia for my research and so basically I did about 15 years in the NGO sector, peace building, all sorts of different things. 10 years full-time as professor at Georgetown, and now about 10 years full-time in social enterprise and still teach a little bit. And had a couple of fellowships and mentors and do a lot of research on careers of impact. And really the number one thing is don't get too focused on one sector or one organization. And I personally no longer distinguish between for-profit, nonprofit, foundation, private sector, government. Like they all have good things and bad things. And it's really like what type of change do you want to affect and what's the right place for your skills at that point, and also who has the money, who's hiring. So good to be here.
Thanks so much, Craig. I will go to Anna next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Pantelik. I'm the executive director of MIT D-Lab. And it's interesting that Jesse and Craig both had experience in Bosnia. I'm not from Bosnia, I'm from Serbia, but from the former Yugoslavia. So my interest in international development really stems from that personal experience, from growing up and then being affected by the war and coming to the US at an early age and spending time in both cultures. And so seeing myself in both parts of the world really got me interested in understanding at a systems level what kind of forces affect international development and poverty, and trying to sort of like Craig was saying, understand the business perspective, but really understand both the private and the public sector's impact on poverty reduction. So I'm a social scientist by training. I spent 15 years working in international development as a practitioner, mostly in social policy, social protection, really just looking at poverty through the lens of finance is the easiest way that I would explain it. I lived in Colombia for a few years, working in for an international social enterprise, and did some work on technology development, trying to find a scalable way to provide financial health to millions of recipients of government support. And so I did that for a while, and then worked for the UN with UNICEF and was based in Uganda for 2 years during the pandemic. And then 2.5 years ago, I moved to Boston for my family and am now based here working in academia. So I've had a lot of kind of different sectoral experience and geographic experience, but I'm very passionate about this work and field, and definitely happy to be as much of a resource as possible for all of you as you're considering future careers and kind of where your wonderful lives will take you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anna. And over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Nanako. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your interest. I see almost 40 colleagues here, including us, so 35. Great interest. That shows the relevance of international development and also the need for the career growth. And I have nothing to do with Bosnia, so if that's distinguishing, I'm from India, if you can look at me. And no, I wish I had, but I did not. I don't mean anything. So, and I have been in the international development sector since past 20 years. I did my education initially in sociology, then I did my doctoral studies in violence, peace, conflict, and women. And then I did my mid-career master's in George Washington University in international policy and practice. And I worked with UNDP. Initially, I worked with indigenous peoples organizations, women's rights organizations in South Asia. Then I worked with the UNDP, Bureau for Crisis Prevention and Recovery, both for Geneva and New York office, before I moved to Oxfam 14 years back. So it's I'm here with Oxfam since 2010. And Oxfam, as you know, is an international development and humanitarian organization. My work is to focusing on gender justice, inclusion, and economic and racial justice. And as a humanitarian organization, this work intersects in several thematic areas. And I see a lot of you are working on climate. So climate justice is one of the 4 pillars along with gender justice for Oxfam. And I did travel a lot. I do travel a lot, like extensively in Africa, Latin and Central America, and Asia, especially East Asia, less of South Asia, except Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan earlier. I do work with LGBTQ communities, indigenous communities, and marginalized women. Again, women are not a whole bunch. There are a lot of intersectionalities and people with different abilities. So that's what I am, and I'm here for any of your questions and contribute the best possible to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If we were to end the career panel right now, which we won't, we've got a lot of questions to go, but if we were to end it right now, I would say my one takeaway just from hearing all of your bios is that like careers take all kinds of shapes and like take you to different, not only different places, but different like organizations, different sectors. Like each of you talked about, well, I worked at this place and then I switched over to this and did something slightly different. Like careers are not just like one place, you know, one organization all the way through from start to finish, but it's just careers kind of evolve and change over time. So just an interesting observation as all of you were talking. But let's dive in. We're here to talk specifically about hiring, right? It's the important part of it's one piece of the broader career puzzle, right? But it's about kind of hiring. How do we get this job? For some of you might be your first job. How do we get these jobs? And I think for me at least, I really appreciate kind of seeing a little bit more of the big picture and how does the hiring process actually work? So Jesse and Anna, you know, because you guys both have kind of experience in different sectors, you know, I'd love to hear, maybe Jesse, we'll start with you again. If you could share with us a little bit about how does hiring work within the U.S. government, which, I mean, I'm not asking, the U.S. government is a huge entity, but like, how does it work, you know, in state? You know, how do people get jobs? Do you just like apply on USA Jobs, like .gov? Is that like the place to go? Or, you know, how have you seen it work? How does the hiring process work within state or other U.S. government institutions?
Sure. So happy to answer that very big question. But I will caveat by saying that my experience is just, you know, one of, you know, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands. So, you know, please take it for what it is. And I will share my experience and hopefully that will offer a few lessons. But actually, when I started at the US government, I started working as a contractor at the State Department. I was recruited. And so I thought that was, you know, very interesting. And I think, you know, one lesson that I think, you know, I'd like to pass on is that, like, you know, if you want to work, based on my experience and my experience of colleagues, is that if you want to work for the US government, you can of course apply. There's different ways for entry level, such as the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, PMF. There's other entry level programs. You can definitely try those and go that route. You know, when I joined the government, I was already kind of well into my career. And I worked for an organization that was lobbying the government. And I was trying to encourage them to do more on LGBT refugees. And this was in the Obama administration. Equality, LGBT rights was a big priority, but they hadn't thought about the refugee component. So I kind of brought that to them and really like was pushing them. I developed a whole campaign. I was working with a whole range of organizations, briefings in Congress. And so they felt the pressure. And they also, I think, felt my persistence and they really liked my ideas. So they actually asked me to join the State Department as a contractor. And from there, I was then converted into a civil service position. So, you know, I think from my and others' experience, I think a few takeaways are, you know, one is I think the government likes to hire people in some instances that they know. You know, so if you want to work with the government, you know, you might want to think about if you wanted to work on climate migration, you might, you know, want to work for a group like Oxfam and, you know, advocate to the government, and then they might, see your creative, exciting, innovative ideas and be like, oh, like that person, they could really bring value to this old, staid bureaucracy that moves really slowly, that needs new ideas and new energy. So, again, that's just my experience. And I think, the other piece that I would pass on is just, your networking is also really important. And I think sessions like this are really vital. But, I think a colleague told me, a thousand coffees, and, trying to just, meet with as many people as you can to understand, what are they working on? What are their priorities? And, maybe there's an opportunity for you to fit in somewhere. So I would definitely use that strategy. And I'm also happy to talk, more in depth either now or later about USA jobs. If folks are interested in that, there's a lot of tricks. It's really its own beast, and you have to understand it. So I'm happy to talk about that now, or we can hear from Anna.
Why don't you just take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit, for maybe folks who are familiar with or are not familiar with it, kind of what it is and
Okay,
how best to navigate.
Right. So USA Jobs is in essence like the federal government clearinghouse to get hired to join the government. And there's different agencies, use it in different ways. You can apply to join the Foreign Service, the Civil Service, the Presidential Presidential Management Fellowship. But a few things to remember about USA Jobs. One is that for current civil servants like me, the only way to be promoted is I have to apply to a vacancy on USA Jobs at a higher grade and get that position. And so that means that it's hugely competitive. And it also means that people who are inside the government have more of a chance, and they're more sought after for the positions. And in fact, there's certain people who have been sitting in their offices for 5, 10 years waiting for a GS-15 to be advertised so they can apply for it. So, I think it's very important to try and understand, if you're interested in USA Jobs, what is the nature of the vacancy? How long has it been advertised? If it's been advertised for 5 days, that probably means they have someone in mind who they want for that position, who's been sitting in that office, who they want to promote. If it's been advertised for like 2 weeks, then, maybe there's more openness. So I think so that's one thing to keep in mind. And it's very annoying, right? In my current position, I would love to be promoted, or I would love to go to another position another office to be promoted. But the only way that can happen is through a USA Jobs application. Then the second point I would just say very quickly is that the keyword, if you are going to apply for a USA Jobs vacancy, matching your resume literally word for word from the advertisement and the keywords and the minimum qualifications, and literally copying those words and putting them in your resume as much as possible is really, really important. And so what happens is, you apply, so the deadline closes. It's a combination of automation and people who are working in HR, and they develop a short list called a CERT. The quote, is a CERT. And that shortlist or CERT is generated from people who score high enough to get on it, and that score is derived from how much the degree to which your resume matches the keywords. So literally, it's about copying the keywords and putting them in your resume as much as possible. And it may not make sense. It often doesn't, because the keywords are very generic, but that's kind of what you have to do. And the other point I would just say is, if you don't make the CERT, nothing can happen. Right? So there's nothing there. It's not like they can add you after, if they really wanted you for some reason and they knew about you, they could cancel the CERT and re-advertise. And of course, that takes 6 more months, right? So, or more. So I think, USA Jobs is very, They're very cumbersome. There's all these dynamics that I'm mentioning. I think, before applying, it's really good to get a sense of, the office, their interest. Is there someone else that they're looking for, or do they have someone that they've identified? And then trying to develop a strategy around that. So I hope that's helpful.
That was hugely helpful. Now I know I'm going to scrap my resume and just keep all those keywords in there. And also temper my expectations. But thank you so much, Jesse. It's helpful to get those insider views. Anna, I'd love to come over to you. So you've worked at UNICEF, you've worked at INGOs, you've worked at academia. I'd be curious to know, how does it work in the UN? It's a really big bureaucracy. How does it work in the UN, and then how does that compare to kind of the NGO sector?
Yeah, so depressingly similar to what Jesse just said. And I think it's really good to be having these conversations, because unless you've gone through the process or you've had someone like Jesse tell you these things, you just don't know. And I'd say that for the kind of first part of my career, I had no clue, no knowledge of how to navigate this world. I applied to a bunch of UN jobs, but I had no idea like what that really means. And so I started the UN much later in my career, when I was much farther along. And actually, if the UN is something you're looking like you'd like to do and you'd like to do longer term, I would actually recommend waiting, because I was able to come in at a much higher level. So I came in as a P4, which is like a very high technical level, with a fixed term contract, which is like the coveted like contract for life. And I was able to do that even though I was significantly younger than some of my peers, because I had a prior experience. If I had started in the UN, it would have been a much slower buildup to get to that level. So that's one point to flag. I joined the UN through this program that UNICEF had, which I don't think that they still have, but it was called the New and Emerging Talent Initiative. And it was sort of designed as a way to recruit outsiders who could like bring in fresh ideas. And so I was really excited by that. And it was about a 6-month process of different interviews. The first was kind of like an automatic video interview. I mean, literally you're told, you have like, the question pops up, you have 2 minutes to speak in your, answer the question in English, and then it shuts off. Like it records you, whatever you've said. And then the second question you do because it was required that you speak another UN language. So the second one I did in Spanish, same thing. And then, so that might not always be the case with UN jobs when you apply. But the second stage is often something called a competency-based interview, which is another thing that you kind of need to practice for. So in the UN job descriptions, they'll list specific competencies that you're expected to have. It's good to kind of try to search online to see how those are defined, and to think about specific examples that would allow you to illustrate how you are able to just sort of illustrate that you have these particular skills and competencies. So, I think what Jesse was saying about like tailoring your resume to the job description is really important. With the UN, I've been, both on the hired and like I was hired and then I was hiring side of things. HR can sometimes actually be a little bit of a blocker. So if a job says that they require a master's degree, they require a master's degree. I have tried so hard to hire somebody who's like right there, just needs to, defend their thesis, doesn't matter, can't get them in. Working with the country office, we were able to push back. It was a fight with HR to get candidates that they kind of, their version of a cert that didn't make their list. So I would always kind of review the list, and they would as well. And so if I identified a candidate who I really liked, I would have to sort of fight for them, which is actually what my boss had to do for me to get me in, because he really liked me. And but they didn't. The HR didn't like me because I didn't have all this UN experience. So I think it's, it's a little bit of it is kind of luck and tenacity and doggedness, persistentness, but a lot of it is also this like knowing what the system is looking for and knowing how to frame things a certain way, and ideally coming across a hiring manager that does really want you and will kind of help like frame the process so that it's a little bit more it allows you to shine in a little bit kind of a better way. Just as an example, one thing that my boss at UNICEF did was I was given this you're given a technical exam that you can submit, and then I was told for the final interview to prepare a presentation, like a pitch to the Minister of Finance about an investment in a program. So design the program, design the pitch, go. And then during the interview process, as I was going through it, and I was sort of given 5 minutes to talk, halfway through he said, "All right, stop. The power's just gone out. The projector has just died. Your PowerPoint no longer works. Keep going." So it was really trying to kind of simulate and see how you would respond in a certain environment. So I think that, being agile and nimble and having had experiences where I know not to be tripped up was really helpful in that sense. So in terms of, I guess I would say a lot of what Jesse said makes sense for the UN as well. This program that I had applied through, I was accepted into, and then spent another 2.5 years getting a position, which is all to say that these large organizations prioritize internal candidates, and they kind of have to, because they're required for for certain contracts to make sure, like especially in the UN, you're required to move from country to country every few years. And so some of them really have, will often already be for somebody internal. So don't be discouraged. It has nothing to do with how good you are. It's just that it's really, really hard to get in, which made it really, really hard to leave. Yeah, so I guess, I could kind of speak to more specifics, but maybe just shifting to the INGO sector. I'd say it's a little bit more loose there. I applied for a job coming out of grad school, having had some experience. I was working in Europe at the time, and I saw this job that was really interesting, but they were looking for somebody with 10 years of experience and perfect knowledge of Spanish, and I had none of those, but I went for it. And then I'd also published some research that I'd done for my master's on this. So kind of submitting my resume alongside something that shows that I'm different, unique, I think helped me get my foot in the door. And then it's really just about showing how you can hit the ground running and you can make people's lives easier for them. And like really as a hiring manager, I just want somebody to in the nonprofit world, you just want somebody to do the work and just get going. And so somebody who can, show perseverance and proactiveness and that they can get things done, and has really understands what you're looking for. So read those job descriptions really closely. I think all those are really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I know I asked you to cover a lot. I mean, that's a lot to cover in one question. And it's just interesting to hear, the large bureaucracies, the UN, the US government, compared to INGOs. And INGOs even, you think of large INGOs with hundreds of employees with a dedicated HR department are going to be hiring a little bit differently than the 3-person INGO, where the hiring manager is just the person who's going through the resumes is the person who's going to be the boss, right? So there are many different experiences, but it's great to hear about how some of these larger bureaucracies work, as well as how it can be very different as the INGO. It's the person going through those resumes, looking for those keywords, are the folks that you're going to be working really closely with. So it's really, again, thinking about what is this job. People spend a lot of time on writing these job descriptions. Don't take them for granted, and really think about how you can tailor your materials to those job descriptions. I look at a lot of resumes as well, and oftentimes you can tell this is just a generic resume that someone has sent to 10 other jobs. It's not targeted. So that's just a good tip, I think, to remember for kind of all sectors and all jobs. Let's shift gears a little bit. Because one of the other questions, in addition to kind of resumes, how does hiring work, another question that I often get from students is, I am a student, I have to take a set of courses, which classes are best going to set me up? I heard that, I have to have experience. So what experiences should I be prioritizing? How do I decide? Because there's so many different, Craig, you talked about different fellowships, there's internships, there's classes, what should students prioritize, right, to be seen as competitive applicants for these international development jobs? And what are hiring managers really looking for in these kind of experiences and knowledge and skills? So Ali Bailey, let's go to you first, and then Craig, we'll go to you next. Just would love to hear, what advice you have for students and what they should be prioritizing in terms of experiences and skills to get while they're in school.
Thank you. I do not like to preach, and what I'm saying is my own experience. So if I'm saying something that happened with me or engaged, so first of all, I would question myself, why do I want to be in international development? What difference I would like to make? Like, I have to be clear about my own career path. It's not for the resume's sake, but for my own sake. I think that helps, that gives a lot of clarity and reduces the stress when we are in the job search, especially. And also, you are all like a different, I was looking at the chat, you're all somewhere in your career paths. You probably worked somewhere, and some of you are doing, like Kim works with us, and other people have volunteered. So I do not take for granted that you have no experience. I see it, definitely all of you have experience, so you intentionally chose this as your path. And especially when we are working in the INGOs or development sector, the hiring happens, I would say, hiring happens not just in INGOs, it happens in think tanks, foundations. Please look at foundations, think tanks, research organizations, and NGOs and INGOs a lot. Oxfam is, we have 10,000 employees across the globe, and we are in 60 countries. And like that, you have several others: Save the Children, Care International, Care USA, Plan International, like a lot of other similar, like that's a one whole sector in itself. And then you have US-based organizations, US-based think tanks, so which have a lot of global work they do. Health sector, I saw climate, depending on those. And the first step begins with, where do I look? There are so many new, since I looked for my last job, there probably are many more, like DevX, DevNet, or job boards, or any other things that where you are looking for. I think that's very critical. And then one other way I would say is asking for information interviews. Often everyone says when we are in a job search, get the foot in the door. Getting the foot in the door is very difficult. People say as if it's very easy, because someone else needs to give us time. Why would they do some research on the organizations and reach out to the relevant people? And they do respond, especially international development, on information interviews. And also universities. Universities do not only teach, but there are certain aspects around research in international development. Organizations always have university partnerships. So that's again a huge area that I would encourage. Typically, in a hiring panel, we have a hiring manager and a HR, and then we have 2-3 experts of the panel. So that, like in our organization like Oxfam, because it's cross-cutting focus. But what I noticed is alignment with the job description matters a lot. So when I work on my resume, I would really put my own skill set. That is, like, I can have 5 pages of experience, but then what really strikes at the first 2 pages, not saying that just fill the other pages, but just be very clear and crisp on what is your unique value, what is my unique value, the skill set, and then experience. Everyone looks for experience. Experience need not be from a job. It can be from any initiative you're involved, volunteering, interning, or accompanying, or university. Then people look for credentials and also global experience, because we are working in international development. Even like some of the colleagues, some of the panelists said, like they all have a lot of different global experience. That's similar. Anyone who is in the international development, some way or the other, writing, reading, or engaging with the global experience, I think is a big distinguisher. And language skills. How do I show up myself, even in the interviews, and also my articulation and relevance. These are all very helpful. And when we are looking for a candidate, I am in my own, I do my own hiring. I'm in several hiring panels across the organization. What we look for is not just the resume, but how does the candidate show up in the interview? And also how much behavioral is also very, very critical. And also it is always important to say what has been my contribution, what difference did I make, then a whole lot of information sharing. And then always remember that there are a lot of opportunities within US. But the only thing is we do need to make that entry. That could happen through universities. You all have career centers, but sometimes often it doesn't happen like that. Sometimes alumni networks help, sometimes they do not. And again, another dimension I would like to focus. Supposing if you are an immigrant like me, then the whole narrative changes. Like the jobs I'm qualified for, who is sponsoring the visas, who is willing to take it on training, and how long I have the visa, who has the budget. So there's a whole set of other issues. So, but there are organizations who are hiring. So you need to look at a small organization might be willing to do it, and some big organizations probably are not willing to. So immigration as international development is also very critical when we are working in countries like this. But I always seen that global experience, interning, volunteering really helps to just get that foot in the door. Rest all follows, I think. And resume has to be very clear, very specific, and also relevant to the job description. Nanako, you're so true. JDs are not just done like that. People spend a lot of time to do a JD. So I would say, those are certain thoughts immediately come to my mind. Over to you, Nanako.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, you covered so much there. You know, not only is it just about your resume, but also the experiences that you have and finding different ways to get that global experience, whether it's, you know, study abroad or volunteering or other things. And for some people, it's not possible. I know that when I was in school, like going abroad was just not possible for me. I didn't have the budget. I didn't know how to make that happen. And so sometimes you also have to think in other creative ways. But sorry, Craig, I realized I also wanted to come to you because you have like always just a million ideas. I'm seeing you plug a lot of things to the chat. Would love to hear your thoughts on what experiences and skills students should prioritize.
Okay. Thanks. And just to go back to the previous conversation, so the Boren Fellowship or fellowship or scholarship is great for US citizens. I mean, I had one and I was the fellowship advisor on the side at Georgetown for 10 years. And for the fellowship, I got funding, went to Bosnia, did my dissertation research. Then I was supposed to work for the government for a year as kind of my giving back. And I only applied for selective places. I didn't get any interviews. And a friend in government said, hey, dummy, you got to use the keywords. And I listened to his advice, and I got lots of interviews. So like, I'm saying that's 100% true. If you don't match what they're asking for, you will not get. And it's true, same with all the UN institutions and multilaterals. So I think I'll say three things. The first thing is what a lot of employers look for is not just the skills. You need to understand the business of change. And I can say so many people come out of undergraduate and graduate programs filled with great ideas and skills. And obviously the audience, there's people from junior to mid-level, but understand like, where does the money come from? Who gives the money? How do you manage the money? How do you report to the donors? And not enough people, when they come out of both undergrad and grad school, if you don't have enough experience, to me, don't understand that. So a big part of the business of change is getting and managing and allocating and reporting on money. Like, not that you have to be a finance person. Like if you're in fundraising, you will have a job forever until AI takes over too much. But really understanding that. And then I think, as everyone else said, language skills is super important. And obviously some languages are more in demand, you know, whether it's French or Arabic or Spanish to some degree, but, and then sectoral experiences, think about the sectors that are growing. So people talk about climate change, huge area, but not just climate change in general. Like you need to understand the broad sector, but then think about, is it climate change in youth, climate change in urban cities? Is it climate change in poverty? So often like having a broad focus, then narrowing it down to a couple of things. And then I would say I've done a lot of research in that. I put a report in, it's old, but it's still relevant. It's the catch-22. If employers want experience, but a lot of employers won't give you the experience. So, some will. So for example, if it's too late for this year, but if you're a graduate student like Catholic Relief Services as the International Development Fellows, some where you don't have to be a US resident, you have to be studying in the US, and deadline's usually in December. They take about 20 to 30 people a year. They put you in the CRS system, they rotate you around, and if they like you and you like them, you could have a career in CRS. So like look at those kind of opportunities. And then understanding evaluation is still going to be a huge growth area. Technology is going to be a huge growth area. Unemployment, food security, agriculture, but also understand some areas are going to be decreasing. And also it's important to understand that unfortunately the business have changed. The money follows where the crises are. So like when I was in Bosnia a long time ago, like Bosnia had a lot of money. Now it has, there's more EU money than US money. Right now, let's say, well, Syria is not that hot anymore, even though it's still in crisis, but it's like also understanding those trends geographically and also sectorally. And then the other piece of advice, finance, admin, data, AI, start getting, you don't have to become a coder, but understand how to start using AI tools. And as everyone else said, you can get a lot of this experience on your campus. You don't have to rush off to some foreign land. If you're from the US, you could often just do this in your home country, home city, or on campus. Get in student leadership groups, get involved with BNID. I was on the board of Alliance for Peace, but like help organize things. Don't just be a member, like help organize a conference, be on a board, allocate money. UNHR one of my alums, the head of USA for UNHCR, like find the groups that you're passionate about and don't just attend, but find some organizing role. And the more you can do that, again, if you're studying and working, if you only have 3 hours a week, it's limited, but the more you can get concrete experience around the areas that you're passionate about, the better. And also a lot of these conferences, whether it's Interaction Society for International Development, those are great. They can often charge a lot of money, but a lot of them look for volunteers. So in a lot of online conferences, look for volunteers. So if you can't afford, Interaction is probably like $1,000. They have student rates. It's a great, if you can't afford, like figure out when they're open for volunteers. And if you can do it, like make it happen. Particularly if you have an organizing role, even if it's only admin, it gives you an excuse to talk to everybody. And then like if you've done the conference, then, Interaction doesn't hire that much, but they have 200 member organizations. So I think the main thing is the more applied experience you can get, both technical skills and programmatic skills, the better. But obviously, you don't have to be unrealistic. Like you're not going to, you don't have to know everything. And then again, fellowships. There's a million fellowships: critical languages, Bourne, Fulbright, Rotary. There's so many fellowships out there. So if you're still in school, if your university has a fellowship office, become best friends with them, because too many people don't look at fellowships, and it's a great way to build skills. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like the takeaway that I'm really getting from this is just like, you can't rely on your coursework alone to qualify you for these jobs. Like employers are looking for more. And student life is busy. You're doing your classes, maybe you're involved on campus, maybe you're also working a campus job, but just finding ways, whether you volunteer at this conference, it's, over the course of one weekend, finding ways beyond your coursework, I think, to get involved and build those skills is important. Craig, I wanted to give you a second to talk a little bit about PCDN and how students can kind of leverage PCDN's resources and job boards.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just say quickly, PCDN Global, it's a social enterprise, and basically for people trying to build impact careers, we curate opportunities, have a blog, a podcast, about 150 episodes, career campus, all sorts of things. And so just go to PCDN Global. You can get our weekly newsletter. You can search the podcast by sectors. We have everything from about innovative finance to engineering for change, for tech for change, impact investing, and not focused on the global north, so both heads of NGOs or impact investors, but also activists. So often you can find something. And then we have some things that are paid, like a career campus, which we can give huge discounts for. And that's really interesting. And also DevX is great. Idealist is not great for development, but it's decent. Impact Pool, Relief Web. And then PCDN, I'll put in here, we also have like a meta job list of all the best job boards. And again, don't just look in development. So you just go to PCDN Global. And again, our podcast is super cool. So yeah,
bunch of really just great resources there. I highly recommend you going to their website and checking it out. So just to we've talked about so much stuff already, but just to close out, I always like to come back to folks. don't want to call it a lightning round because the answer can be as long as you want it to be, but to come back to all four of our panelists is to ask you, if you had one piece of advice, which is kind of tough to narrow it down to one, but if you had one piece of advice to give to students about kind of landing their next job in international development, what would it be? So let's go in reverse order on my screen. So Alibelu, let's go with you first.
Interesting. Get internships.
Great.
Internships.
I love it.
Yeah.
Internships. Anna?
Apply even if you don't meet all the criteria.
Oh, I like that one. Great. I'll go to Craig and then Jesse.
Network for impact. Don't be transactional. Like, be curious, and LinkedIn is your best friend if you use it not to get a job, but to build a network.
Yeah, I just realized we didn't talk about networking very much, but the power of relationships is also helps you to get to know who's doing what work, what type of the organizations are, and things like that. But that's the great, not just networking for transactional purposes, but actually building those relationships. And Jesse, over to you.
Just to clarify, I did say 1,000 coffees in networking.
Oh, you did? Yes,
Right, yeah.
Definitely.
So my one piece of advice would be to publish, to write, and to try and get your word and your ideas out there, because then people recognize that you have ideas, you are creative, and if you publish even in a blog, in your university newsletter, and it's accepted, it shows that other people notice. So I would suggest publishing as much as you can.
I like that. And there's so many ways to publish these days, whether that's blogs on different types of websites, like BNID has a blog, or campus resources. There's so many ways to do it. Well, thank you so much for panelists for going through all of our list of questions. I'd love to open it up to the students for you all to be able to ask questions of the panelists, whether it's about their specific experiences or general advice. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll open up the floor. But what questions do you all have for our panelists? Nabil, go ahead. And then Karen next.
For your feedback and for all the great answers that we've gotten. My question is more around, Professor Nanako said about going through different experiences and different paths to reaching where you're at. So when you're putting that together in a CV, how do you put your best foot forward? When you've come across different experiences, how do you remain relevant to the job that you're applying to? So that's my question. Thank you.
But can you, so you're asking about, you've got this wealth of experiences in your CV. How do you tailor it for the job, or is that the question?
Yes.
Any panelists want to jump in?
I can try.
Go ahead, Anna.
Well, I would just say, try to tell a story. Think of a narrative. I mean, try to really think about the job that you're trying to, get, what they're looking for. And within the different roles you've had, talk about how just highlight those skills as they pertain to the job. First year out of grad school, I taught English in Spain. Did not like it. Not for me. Did it have to do with international development? Not really. So I focused on what we organized some programs for students to teach them about sustainable development. I was learning a new language, those kinds of things. So that job was not necessarily what got me to the next job, but the skills that I developed in that role were the things that I could highlight to then kind of shape the arc. So sometimes you take jobs because you just really need to get your foot in the door, and you need to figure out where you're going to go. You need to get paid. So that's what I would just say is try to frame it maybe around a story or an arc, but really just think about the specific skills and the job that you're going for to match that. And just also make sure you're not saying something that's not true. Whatever you say should be honest. So don't kind of over embellish things. Yeah.
And I would just add two things. So your resume, I put in a post we did on resumes, but your resume, if you make the employer decipher or figure out how your experience applies to the job, you're going to be out. So don't think about yourself, think about the employer, why are they hiring? And as Anna said, it's a lot about skills, but it's also about metrics and impact. So if you manage a budget, if it's $1,000, who cares unless it's a student group? But if the numbers work to your advantage, like show numbers and change. So if you managed like an Instagram or TikTok for an organization, if you grew it by 100%, so the more you can show change, metrics, and numbers, of course you need the story as well, the better off it is. And always think like, is this, and I agree 100%, the job you did doesn't have to be relevant, but if the skill is, then include it. Like I was a waiter, or like it doesn't matter what the job is, like if there's a skill you can draw out of it that's relevant, then highlight the skill.
Yeah, thanks, Anna and Craig. Great advice. Karen, let's go over to you.
Hi, thank you everyone. I appreciate this. This has been helpful. I have two questions if it's okay. The first one, kind of going off of what you were saying, Craig, about just being a part of like organizations and stuff. I'm wondering if it matters like what stage you did this at, because I feel like I did a lot of this in undergrad when it came to like budgeting and all of this stuff. But now that I'm in my like graduate program, I'm not doing so much of it. So does it matter?
I'll just say quickly, I think as long as it was in the past few years, it doesn't matter. If it's like 10 years ago, then like if it's a huge break, then it might matter. But otherwise, if it was something, if you are 3 years out of undergrad, and obviously we all have busy lives and need to pay the bills and have responsibilities. There's also like, don't put too much pressure on yourself to like do everything. But like, to me, it doesn't matter that much, unless sometimes people say, oh, in high school, I did this, like, who cares? Like if it's too long ago, don't list it.
Yeah.
Like obviously, unless it's a fellowship, but that's just my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And then the second question was about publishing, and does it count if you are considered like a co-author, or is it better to, I mean, I'm trying not to be an et al, but that's hard.
Jesse, since you talked about publishing, let's go over to you.
Sure, yes. I think publishing like with colleagues is good. I think that also shows drive and innovation in the same way that I was mentioning. I think if you can also have something where you're standing alone is also good. But I think doing both is very good. And it's also like speaking of resumes, it's a new section on your resume, right? Because you can list publications. So I think both are very helpful.
Thank you.
Great. We've got a couple more questions. Let's go to Judong.
Hi, thank you. My name is Yudong, and my question is about breaking into your first internship. Since I'm going to global public health, I want to cover a diverse, set of topics, but, exploring wise, it's really hard to exactly, to find your first internship or find your first career opportunity when you aren't completely sure what you want to, focus on. So how do you put your best foot forward breaking into that first internship? Because I understand some people say after that first hump, it gets easier from there.
I would just jump in very quickly and just say, I think I found it helpful to give yourself options, right? And so to apply broadly. And I think if you apply to lots of different things, then you can also test if you have, what sticks and what you're most interested in. And then that can help shape kind of where you go. So I think giving yourself options and different choices through lots of applications that are, of course, done carefully, as we've all discussed, is one thing you might want to think about.
Any other thoughts? I would say that another thing, just, we heard the panelists talk about their different kind of career paths, that they take all kinds of different kind of twists and turns, and you might work on one thing, you work on, a specific part of public health, in this job, and then you switch maybe to a different part of public health, or maybe you leave public health completely and work in a different sector. And so jobs kind of work in a weird, careers work in a weird way, so that don't put too much pressure on yourself. Your first internship is just your first internship. And you might actually go into it, and kind of what Anna was saying, you might go into it and realize, oh my gosh, this field is absolutely not what I want to do. This is not, I thought I wanted to do public health and work in the nonprofit sector, but wow, this is way different than I expected. I don't want to do this. So it's more of a learning experience, more of just a stepping stone. So, wherever you end up is a great place to start. Let's go to, I'm going to try my best. Guilherme?
You just call me Guy.
Guy, perfect.
Yeah, I usually go by that. So I have two questions, if that's okay. We talked a lot about first of them, we talked a lot about resumes. But sometimes I feel like I spend more time sort of like working on my cover letters than my resumes. So the first question is like, how do you think like those weigh against each other? Like, are cover letters usually more like relevant in resumes, or like, because I feel like you can kind of explain things better and sort of like tell a narrative about yourself. And should I ask my second question now, or like should I wait for later?
Let's pause. Ali Bailey, since you said you've sat on a lot of hiring panels, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. Cover letters are really distinguishable, because often many applications we get, we just generally get resumes. We do not get cover letter. When we look at resumes, a lot of similarities in each of the resumes we see, because people of similar interest are applying. But in the cover letter is a chance where we actually put ourselves out there on the matching why it is needed and what is very unique about this application. So definitely doing a cover letter is, especially in international development, other jobs I do not know, I think is critical. I encourage to do that. Thank you.
Should I add something?
Yeah.
So I know that there's folks that are now using a lot of software. So they'll use software to scan through different things. So the keywords thing is just something to point out. And the other is, I've had to review like 300 resumes. And I know this is really depressing, but you literally spend 30 seconds cross glance. Like, it's so quick. You just don't have the time to go through them in detail. So just think about, it's okay if it's succinct, but somehow needs to be catchy. Like, you do need to have those words in there. It needs to be clear and compelling language. Think about the formatting, even with your like if it's designed differently, which sometimes when you're putting it into a system, the design gets totally lost. But I know that's a little bit depressing, but it is a quick thing. So if there's something that can catch your eye, it's sort of like with when you're applying for colleges. I mean, I think admissions officers read them more intensively, but it's really just keep in mind somebody's going to go through it really quickly. You want to catch their eye, and then you also want to pull them in with your story. And I will typically get both cover letter and CV, and I look through both of them, and it's important. Yeah.
Jess, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I would just say to kind of build off what Anna said is, and I think Anna, you might have some response on this, but I think also the networking is really important, because if someone knows you who's doing the hiring, or someone else knows you who's weighed in, then your resume becomes more than a resume. It becomes, oh, so-and-so mentioned that Guy is interested, has done really great work in his course on climate migration. And I should pay attention to it. So that means when Anna's reviewing her 300 resumes, I think she'll have like maybe a special eye out for his resume. So I think the networking is also like incredibly important as well. But I don't know if Anna has more to say on that.
Yeah, and sometimes I will even, like, some people are really good at writing resumes, and they're really awful people, and they're awful humans. And so I will, I think Craig was mentioning LinkedIn. If I ever find folks that I'm interested in, especially at a higher level, that they've had more experience, I will look to see who they're connected to, and I will see if they have, who's connected to whom. And I might even reach out and say, like, do you know this person? And we'll ask for some feedback. In the same way that you'll offer references, but I might do that as well. So yeah, networking is important.
Yeah. And Guy, you have a second question.
That's actually a great transition, because I was actually going to ask about networking. I have this fear that sometimes if you like try to approach someone, you may just sound like you're I don't know, you're just like talking to them because you have like interests like for yourself, or you whatever. I just feel like a little shy sometimes since like approach people I don't know to try to like talk to them, or just like get to know them. So I also start building this network. So do you have any like networking advice?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I think people go for it, just like try, and I think also try to link what you're doing to what they're doing, so they're not only helping you, they can like learn from you. I also think if you've interacted with someone in the past, or you had someone as a professor, like remind them of that. I had someone reach out to me who I worked with like many years ago, and she's like, do you have time to meet or to like have a Zoom call? And I couldn't even remember where I had met her. And then I asked her and she explained, but like ideally I wouldn't have had to do that. She would have said, we worked together on this project, 3 years ago, like I'd love an update. I think also like building a networking tree. So you met with this person, thinking ahead, like what are the questions that you want to ask that person? Like doing a deep dive on who they are, what is their experience, who can they introduce you to? And then following up with a follow-up. Thank you. Like, it was great to meet you. Can you introduce me to so-and-so? So going in with as much knowledge as you can, I think also helps. And then also, don't be bashful. We're all busy. Sometimes it takes, a second, a third email, wait a few weeks. I'm not saying write the person like, 3 times in one day or 1 week, but if it's been a few weeks and they haven't heard back, write again, quick. Hey, just wanted to make sure you saw this, would love to meet up. I've had people approach me randomly on LinkedIn. Sometimes I have time to respond, sometimes not. So I think cast a broad net and just go for it.
I just want to add 2 things. So really good advice. I personally don't love informational interviews, and not that you shouldn't do them, but I think people have gotten busier with just work and social media. So I often think join the networks if you join a network, whether it's BNID or Alliance for Peace Building or Society for International Development, whatever your net impact, join the networks, because then you get access to people. So if you're part of the same network, even if you've never met the person, they're more likely to say yes, or if you attend a conference. So I'm not saying don't do informational interviews. Then the second thing, a lot of what informational networking or interviews is about you being transactional, even if you're trying to help the other person. The best thing I've ever seen people do, and I've done this a lot, if you have a curiosity about an issue, do a research project, do a podcast, do video interviews where you're the one curating. So you can approach people and say, I'm working on this. It doesn't have to be for a class, and say, like, I know lots of people in my professional people. So it doesn't have to be forever. Like it could be a blog or 3 blogs. But if you're doing something not just for yourself, but curating, particularly on LinkedIn, it gives you the excuse. Then you'll get much higher people saying, yeah, I'll take 20 minutes or I'll have coffee, because you're not just doing it for you, even if you are. So that to me is one of the best things you could ever do if you find that niche.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, a lot of great responses there. I'm going to go to a question in the chat, and thanks to the panelists who are also typing and answering questions in the chat as well. But this question, I thought it'd be great to bring to the group. So it is from Kim, who said, do any of you see trends on the availability of entry-level or junior-level positions in humanitarian or developed programming in the US? Because I'm getting the impression that programmatic work is done more and more by country teams, and the jobs available in the US are resource development or highly technical advisor roles. So just curious, what are you guys seeing in terms of kind of entry level or junior level positions that are based here in the US?
That's a great question. Honestly, it also depends on who we are working with. Are we working with contractors? Are we working with the INGOs? Or we are working with the universities or others where the research happens? If it's a typical research, international development jobs are there as a researcher internationally, based here. But whereas it is program delivery, then those roles are moving more in the spirit of decoloniality and commitments. It's moving to the countries where the work actually really happens. But with foundations and with small organizations, I do see that there are opportunities. It's not like it's only happening there. A lot of work happens across sectors, climate, health, gender, in different organizations, gender-based violence, care. Here, a lot of entry-level jobs, mainly around research and advocacy, I feel.
Yeah, and I'll also add that, oh, then Jesse, I'll go to you, is just saying that, you know, a lot of times, like I started my career actually I was an executive assistant, and it helped me just, again, get that first job. It was not glamorous. I did a lot of coffee getting, I did a lot of admin work, but it helped me get started, right? And then from there, I made more connections and built that resume. But you know, we all have to start somewhere. Some people are lucky and they start with that first programmatic job and they're getting to do all the things. But you know, fundraising, I think it was Craig, I can't remember who said it, but like, if you know how to do fundraising, if you have those skills, you can have a job for the rest of your life. Like, people will want to hire you because that's something that's very common in this space. But just to say that, you know, some of these jobs, it may seem like less desirable for whatever reason, because it's not, you know, direct program work in a foreign country somewhere, are still incredibly valuable, and it's still a great place to start. Jesse, over to you.
I would just say very quickly that I think, you know, jobs to manage U.S. foreign assistance, like contractor jobs, like are still very much in need, growing, and, you know, very, very significant opportunities there.
Thanks. And Jesse, for those contractor jobs, 2 questions. One, are those on USA Jobs? And 2, do you have to have some experience in order to get those contractor jobs? Are those like considered entry level, or do you need to have some experience?
Some of them are entry level, some of them are not, but many of them are. And you know, you learn a lot on the job because it's managing foreign assistance. There's a lot of like grants and oversight. And to apply, I mean, there's different contracting websites. It's not on USA Jobs.
Okay.
So I would suggest, like, if you're interested in this type of work, if you want to work on gender or health, you know, trying to find those parts of the government that are working and managing foreign assistance on those topics, and then like trying to figure out which contracting companies are they using, and then you can kind of follow the chain that way. And DevX is a great resource, as someone just put in as well.
Yeah, and Craig just wrote that, you know, some of these contractors, Tomonics, CAI, MSI, there's a ton of them. They work on government contracts. That's pretty much all that they do. Olivelu, please jump in.
It's not about this question. I can wait. I want to respond to
no,
the
please.
question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I saw in the chat, there's a question from Jacob. Is it important to do master's and PhD to work in international development? Yeah. Great question. Because after we do undergrad or while doing, if we get an opportunity to do something hands-on, I would encourage that something that will be a very valuable career point of view. Yes, doing graduation is great. But again, often in places I had seen some of the candidates with the undergrad and experience weigh strongly against the graduate. So, but PhD, definitely, if you want for an international development job, do you need PhD? I do not think so, from my point of view, because it is something, you may ask why. Why did I do? I did because I was teaching them. So that's the academics. So like Nanako said, our career took so many paths. I used to be an academician before. So if we want to go more into research, think tank, academic type, doctorate, that's definitely essential. But others, undergrad, experience, I think experience makes all the difference, and also graduation will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you went back to that question, because I know that's something a lot of people are wondering, you know, do I need to go get a master's degree? And I'll say that I've been reading a lot of articles that are saying that companies are realizing that master's degrees aren't always the be all end all of requirements, and that some companies are starting to shift away from that. I will say, just from my experience in the international development sector, it's still, most people do have master's degrees, but I'm curious to see, you know, over the next 5 to 10 years, kind of that requirement might change. So we're just in the last couple of minutes of our session here. So unfortunately, I think we're out of time for questions, but really appreciate all of your questions. Really want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for just sharing your time and your expertise and knowledge and perspectives. I I myself learned a lot. Now I know what I'm going to do when I apply for my next job. It sounds like a lot. I'll reflect on that when we're talking about, okay, you need to read the job description really carefully. You got to tailor your resume, got to do the cover letter, got to network. It's a lot. And then you're applying to 10, 15 jobs at a time. It can be a lot. But I think that, at the end of the day, unfortunately, this is the work that we have to put in order to kind of get that ball rolling. And then, once you start to get your presence in international development or whatever sector you end up in, things will start to come a little bit more naturally because your network will grow, over the years as you're working in this field and you're meeting more people and your connections, and people will get to know you, your publications, what type of work you do. The path will get easier. I guess different challenges come up, but it's put in the work now, and the rest will follow. But just to say, thank you so much to all 4 of our panelists and bringing your perspectives and your experiences. Again, I've learned a ton, and I hope you all have as well. 2 things I'll say just in closing is, if you could just take 2 minutes and complete our post-event survey. So would love to hear, did you find this advice useful? Did you not? What would you like to see from us next time? We plan around 4 or 5 events a year through this aid and higher ed program with your schools, with your universities. We want to know, what do you want to see next? What panelists do you want to see? What sectors do you want us to talk about? So please take a minute to go into that survey and help us know what you'd like to see next. I'll also say that, again, this panel is organized by BNID, the Boston Network for International Development. We put out a newsletter every other week that talks about what's happening in and around Boston or New England, whether that's events that are happening in international development events. That could be lectures that are happening, networking events. There's all kinds of mixers and things. Jobs. So we have our own specific job board for jobs in New England, greater Boston area for international development. So if you're thinking about staying here, whether that's looking for an internship that's based here or a job, that's another great resource. But we send out that newsletter every other week. So I recommend you sign up if you'd like to keep in touch. And with that, again, just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you all the students and faculty from the universities for attending, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you all the best.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Thank you.